Welcome back to another edition of Between Two FARS. I'm Warneke Miller here once again with Robert Tepfer. And Sensei Tepfer, I have an inscrutable riddle for you today. What is an incentive but not a penalty?
I am so glad you asked that question, which leads me right into, as everybody knows, liquidated damages. Yes, liquidated damages are used primarily in construction projects, and the basis for them is that you really don't know what actual damages would be. They're just too hard to calculate there at the end. And so what you do at the beginning is you do what's called a reasonable estimate of actual damages created at the time that the contract is put together. Okay? And it's a very interesting thing to do because it does create an incentive, because the contractor is going to, by definition, lose money. And a lot of times in construction projects, what will happen is they'll go to another project if you're not careful, because they may have it like 80% done. And this effectively tells them you can do that, but it's going to cost you. And
liquidated damages is a daily rate that they're charged if they don't meet scheduled deadlines?
That's right.
Okay.
It's a completion date. Now, there's always, conditions. One of them is if they do substantial performance. If you go in and occupy the facility and use it, in most instances, that will effectively, pull any kind of liquidated damages at that point in time. You're getting the benefit of, beneficial use, beneficial occupancy of the facility. And, you can't really have it both ways. You can't be going in there and using it at the same time claiming that you've been damaged.
So you're not seeing liquidated damages being used to clean up a punch list of items. If you're in the building, you're using the building, you're not using liquidated damages, right?
Right. It's really not, I'd say you really don't have a basis. It begins to smack more of a penalty, and the trigger of being denied the facility, being denied the use, the whole reason why you calculated it is lost. And that way, that really would violate any kind of equitable principles that you might run into before any board or court. That is just not fair.
Yeah, they will not enforce something that looks like a penalty. So
right.
How do you calculate such that it is still an estimate? Because if you've got actual damages, you shouldn't be, and you know what your actual damages would be, you shouldn't be using a liquidated damages clause, right?
That's right.
Okay, but at the same time, if you've just sort of got a wild guess, maybe a round number that you just think, it'll probably cost us about this much money a day, that's not enforceable either, right?
Right. And as we talked offline, the issue becomes you really need to be kind of fact specific. Every now and then, and in DOD, Department of Defense, they use liquid damages. And from time to time, when you litigated, the problem you had was they would have one number that they put in repeatedly, and it wasn't fact specific. It was just like, well, this looks good. And it does include some of the administrative costs that we have, but they used it from everything from sidewalks to large buildings. And those things would have predictably different damages at the time you create the contract. And as such, they wouldn't be a reasonable estimate of actual damages on that particular project. And that's one way to kind of impeach, the whole process when you get into litigation and say you really had no right to take this because you didn't calculate it as liquidated damages need to be calculated. Now, liquidated damages, the way you undo them, and I'll tell you that having lived it, is you have to make certain that you answer the mail, that there aren't any delays, such that when you do go in and you assess liquidated damages, for instance, for 60 days, that you don't find out that they had pointed out a delay and you'd failed to respond to this excusable delay in a reasonable time period, such that you're part of the problem. And if you're part of the problem, that effectively cuts out those days and gives them more days to the completion date.
Now, if you're going to try to assess the liquidated damages against your contractor, I don't expect that they're going to just say, oh yes, let me write a check for you. They're going to challenge it. And one of the challenges you talked about was they might assert that it's a penalty and therefore it's unenforceable. So you need that background documentation showing that it was a reasonable estimate. They might also, as you were just talking about, assert that, hey, it's not our fault. You guys are the ones who are delaying us. We would have made the scheduled deadlines, but you changed specifications on us. You added a new requirement. You didn't clear the road so that we could bring in the heavy construction equipment like you should have. What other things might you see if you're trying to enforce liquidated damages? Anything else that they might come up with and try to argue they shouldn't have to pay?
Okay, what I would do is I would look, if I were on the other side, at any kind of remedy providing provision that provides any kind of an equitable adjustment. Because what is an equitable adjustment? It's time and money. And in the context of liquidated damages, what you're looking for is time. Okay? If you can put down a justification of additional time, you effectively undermine the liquidated damages argument that you didn't get it completed on the right date.
Very good. Yes. Yes.
So you have to be very careful of that. Now, to the extent that they don't make any of these assertions until after the completion date has arrived as designated, it doesn't guarantee it for you, but they certainly look like they got their lawyers involved as opposed to them putting you on notice. That's why I said, read the mail. If early on, they're laying the basis for, different site condition, telling you there's a problem, and you don't address that issue and have any kind of basis, you're going to have a problem. Even if you do, they might come back later and say, we told you, 6 months ago, you didn't provide us a remedy. So now we're putting in for that time and money.
All right. Any other important aspects of liquidated damages that we need to keep in mind?
Yeah, the rule is that you cannot waive it or give it away absent going to the general accounting office. So if you do use liquidated damages, you better be able to hang your hat on an entitlement to additional time, because absent that, you're going to have to get permission. There are a few cases out there, but they're very rare, that speak to the fact that if you get to that point and you get to completion and you can calculate very accurately actual damages, that you might be able to go for them. But that cuts both ways. You might be less, it might be more. So, that is very fact specific. But be aware of liquidated damages. And if you have a type of project that has a very urgent completion date, you can consider putting it in there. You have to understand that this is kind of like a contingency. Contractors will, sometimes say, I think I can make it within 10 days of that. And they will include perhaps, more in the way of costs. They won't call it that in case they run over
pricing somehow.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this tutorial on liquidated damages today, Sensei Bob. And we will see you all back here again for the next edition of Between Two FARS. Bye-bye.